So our next speaker is Richard Ross. He is a senior biologist at the Steinhart Aquarium at the Cal Academy of Science. He runs the Skeptical Reefkeeping blog, and he was our 2014 MASNA Award winner. And today his talk is Wading Through Reef BS and Coming Out Clean. So let's welcome Rich.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, that's on. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Like Ben said, my name's Richard Ross. Animal Planet thinks I'm a doctor. This is my wife. She likes ice skating. My daughter likes to jump horses, and we take Halloween very seriously. At home, I've got a big reef tank and a secret home lab where I breed octopuses and do my favorite thing ever, which is feed clownfish to Dr. Seuss fish. And I do the skeptical reef. And by the way, I do that because I think feeding... I'll put that back on because it's fun to watch. Feeding marine predators is a difficult thing, so these are not clownfish that we bought at the store. These are culls from a local breeder, so they were destined to go in the bin anyway, and I think we might as well use them up. So there's no good really way to do that and send them around because people will keep them as pets and it will drive the market down. But if you're near somebody who's breeding, and you can work it out to get their culls. They make a great food source. I think it's so much better than just wasting them. I work at the California Academy of Sciences, where I help run this 212,000-gallon reef tank. And more recently, replicating Jamie Craggs' work, this year's MASNA Award winner, doing coral spawning, in situ synchronous coral spawning. So we were able to pull that off for phase 1 of the project. There's a lot of weird stuff in here. Hold on, what is going on? There we go. There we go. Okay, so we're here to talk about reef BS, and there's a ton of BS in reef keeping, but we're not special. There's a ton of BS all over the place. And how do you fight it, and why do you care? And why do we specifically care about it with reef keeping? And it's because it matters to your animals' lives and to your money, right? If you make the wrong choices or use the wrong information, your animals die and you spend a whole bunch of money. I'm more concerned about the animals dying with all the scrutiny that the industry is under nowadays. So I want to do everything we can to not needlessly have animals die. So I think the best way to kind of approach this and be able to make decisions about what you should be doing or what methodologies to use or what products to use is to be skeptical. And sometimes that idea comes with a negative, but I don't really think it should come with a negative. It's being skeptical is really a method, not a position. So I don't sit around and think I'm going to say no to everything. I just look at things and decide and think, does that make sense, and what support is there for that idea? So it's a method of intellectual caution and suspended judgment. And I'll say at the outset, and I think I say it a few times because I'm going to talk about specific products in this talk, I want all products and all methodologies proposed to do what the people proposing them say they're going to do. I don't want any of them not to work. I would like nothing more than to have a miracle in a bottle that would take care of ick, or that would take care of the nitrogen cycle, or any of a slew of a million things. I'd love that to happen. It just turns out the world being the way it is, it doesn't. So just some ideas, some famous skeptics. That's James Randi, probably the first one that really in modern times made a difference. Penn and Teller, because we're in Vegas, so you might as well go see their show. Mythbusters. Skeptics. The most famous skeptic, of course, is the Scooby-Doo gang. If it weren't for you meddling kids. So be like Scooby-Doo, right? But what we want, a lot of people talk about proof, and I'm not interested in proof, because proof really only exists as a mathematical concept. You want evidence, right? And there's either compelling evidence or weak evidence, because anything can be evidence. And you know, even in Mythbusters, they talk about, they don't say proven, right? They say, what do they say? They say confirmed, right? Or denied or plausible, but they don't say proved, and there's real reason for that. This is kind of a hierarchy of how evidence works, and at the bottom you've got anecdotal reports, and then you've got systematic observation, and then you get into studies. So what we get most of the time in the hobby is anecdotal reports. And anecdote often gets a bad name, and it should, because there's real problems with anecdote. There's a lot of problems with first-person reports of what you've seen. I guess Ron Scheimek used to have, I used to say this, it's uneducated people giving uneducated responses about things that they don't know about. And that's an anecdote report. But that's kind of all we have. So I don't want to think of it as negative anymore. It's positive. The world is really built on anecdote. I see a dog bit me, and because it was running at me. If I see another dog running at me, it might bite me. That's a good survival instinct. But there's also big problems with it, and we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk a little bit about systematic observation, which is, I think we see a lot of that. I was on the floor talking to the people at Benepets yesterday, and they said that they had a video of coral growing in a tank that they fed their food to. And I said, how do you know it's the food? And they said, we knew you were going to ask. We have 2 tanks. One we're not feeding our food, and one is not, and we'll have that video out later. And I think that's great. That's the way we can build things. So anecdote allows you to jump to bad conclusions all the time. To demonstrate that, we'll talk about ick. And ick is kind of like the common cold of the reefing world, except deadly, right? So with common cold, I was just in Eleuthera in the Bahamas, and I was sick, and everybody gave me a recipe for what would cure my cold, ranging from not eating cheese to having pepper with honey in it to a double shot of gin. None of those worked. The gin was okay. So this is ick, right? Ick is a parasite, and it affects fish, and it can kill them when it goes out of control. And there's lots of different ways people try to approach ick. One of the ways is they use cleaner shrimp. Unfortunately, cleaner shrimp don't eat ick, and we'll get to that in a second. There's bottles of stuff that are purported to work and clear up ick. I don't know if they do or not, and we'll say why. We've got things like ginger and garlic, which are supposed to take care of ick as well. Or this was the funniest one I ever saw, was people were talking about changing the bulbs and the ick went away. And it was really, they changed the bulbs in the room and the ick went away. It wasn't even on the tank. Of course, bananas notoriously cure ick. So why are there so many different approaches to taking care of ick? It's because of the life cycle of the parasite. There's 2 free-swimming stages. So what happens is your tank gets infected or your fish are infected and everything looks fine. Then you see those white spots, right? And those are there for 3 to 5 days. Then what happens is they go off. That's the parasite itself, and then the parasite jumps off for its reproductive phase where it insists and then is on your substrates. So there's a time when you initially get ick that it goes away and your fish actually don't show symptoms of it anymore. Then those cysts hatch out, swim around, they find a new host, and reinfect your tank. So what that means is anything you do when you see ick for the first time in your tank will look like the ick went away. Anything, because the ick goes away. It doesn't really stay constant until the parasite gets a real hold, and there's a lot of different timelines going on for different stages of the parasite. So they start to overlap, and that's when your fish get into real trouble because they can't deal with it. This is called post hoc ergo proctor hoc. It's a fallacy, a bad way of thinking, and we do it all the time. The classic one is, the rooster crowed in the morning, and then the sun came up. Therefore, the rooster crowing made the sun come up, which is not true. I've seen the sun come up without roosters. But I think I've got 4 things in this talk that I want you to walk away with. And an understanding of post hoc and correlation not equaling causation is one of the big ones. That's everywhere. So anything you add, a lot of the testimonies you see for any reef product or method is, I added this and my stuff looked better. Well, you also did a whole lot of other things to your tank before you added that stuff. If you're fighting hair algae, nobody ever just does one thing when they're fighting hair algae. So it's very difficult to point to the last thing you did to say that that's what took care of the hair algae. There's months of the other stuff you did that may have been taking time to build, or it might just be the cycle of the tank anyway. So this is a hard one not to fall for. So just be aware of it because it's good. It's not necessarily a supplement. This is a new product out by Polyp Lab, and again, I want it to work. I'm not up here to bash products. We're just here to talk about products. This one is supposed to have a reef-safe oxidizing agent, which is supposed to attack the free-swimming stages of the parasite. So this one's, that would be great if it worked, right? It would be great. And I've been talking to them, and they want to do some tests and some studies. I don't know. I don't have much time or space to be able to do that or help them with it. It's not really my bag. And testing ick is a crazy thing anyway because it's very hard to isolate and very hard to, and then there's ethical considerations about infecting fish on purpose to see what happens. Yeah, that gets a little weird. The skeptical side of me goes, though, I have to say, you know, a reef-safe oxidizing agent, I have a difficult time jumping on the idea that there's an oxidizing agent that only likes to oxidize the free-swimming stage of ick. It could be the case that the trophont or the tomont is much more susceptible to being oxidized than the coral tissue. But that's going to really need to be shown. We're going to need something that we can really sink our teeth into. Until that, all we have is the anecdote. And sadly, the anecdote is just as good as you know, ginger or light bulbs, which don't seem to actually pay off. So what does cure ick? We know there's really like 4 things that really do it. Copper treatment, hyposalinity, chloroquine, phosphate, and the transfer method. Right? So we know these things work. We've seen them work over and over again, and we also have studies that show that they work. But none of them are reef safe, which is another reason why everybody wants a thing in a bottle, because nobody wants to catch their fish out of their reef tank, because that can be very difficult. So we know these things work. So how does the transfer method work? Because I think that's my favorite one, because there's no medication at all needed with that. You take the fish and you put it, I like to put it in a 2-gallon bucket with an air stone and a heater, and then every 3 days, put it in a new bucket with new water. And what happens is the parasites jump off the fish, they go down into the bottom of the bucket, and they're waiting to hatch out again to be able to reinfect. But before that can happen, you move that fish to another body of water that's already clean. Then you either you can let the first bucket dry out for 24 hours. That's been proven or shown. I fall into that all the time too, saying proven. It's been shown to kill the parasite in all stages. Or I think it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit if you heat the water to that. Or you could use a lot of bleach and do it too. And then you just do that 4 or 5 or 6 times, and there's no parasite left, and that works. So I'm hesitant to talk about this, but I think it's good when we're looking for how to wade through the BS. Since we know that the parasite, when it's free swimming, if you get the fish out of that, they can't be infected. What if you take the parasite out of the water where the fish is? So we had a orange spotted filefish tank that had ick in it, and it was impossible to catch any of the fish out, just because it was, for various reasons. So what we did was I set up one of these filters with a 25 micron pleated cartridge in it. The thing is, the free swimming stages of the parasite ick are about 18 microns, 15 to 18 microns, depending on which source you look at. Good thing about a pleated cartridge, as it runs and gets dirty, it filters out finer and finer material. So theoretically, it makes sense that you could pull out the free swimming stages out of the water before they can infect the fish. Or you could run diatomaceous earth in there, and then you get really small filtration. So, but is it happening, right? So when I talk about this, when I talk about this, I haven't written anything about it yet, but I talked to a lot of people before I tried it to see if my thinking was crazy or not. But when I talk about it, I say, this is the thing I did. I don't know if it works. It makes sense that it could work, but does it work? I don't know. You know, because all I can say is, I did it on the tank. I ran it for 3 or 4 months because why not? And a big pump. So it was a big pump, like a Mag 8, I think. And it was drawing water from the tank directly, because it felt to me if you draw it from the sump, you're not actually where the parasites are. And the ick never came back. Is it this, or is it just the life cycle of the parasites, or did the fish become immune? I don't know, but that's a direction that feels like it's worth looking at, right? And so now, how do we know if that anecdote makes any sense? What we've got in the hobby is 1 million monkeys, right? So we've got 1 million hobbyists out there trying stuff all the time, and that's a good thing. So when you've got an anecdote like, let your tank cycle for at least a month before you put stuff in it, enough people have done that enough times with enough testing to make you go, yeah, okay, yeah, that seems like a thing we can reasonably assume is true. So if 1 million people did this, and I don't recommend it, I'm not going to recommend that at all. I'm going to recommend that you pull your fish out and that you do the transfer method or one of the other methods because you want your fish to live. But if you run into a problem, maybe this is a way to go. And here's the 1 million monkeys, right, all working on stuff. So successful replication is really good. And the sad danger here is that it's difficult to get the metrics from the monkeys, right? So that's why these ick treatments keep coming back over and over again, because we don't have real good data. So we don't know how many times somebody put ginger in their tank and their fish died. Nobody likes to report that anyway. But they do love to report the successes. But because it's anecdote, we have to squint at those successes a whole lot. Salt is another place where we run into a lot of anecdote. And there's a lot of different salts. And you'll know that every time a new salt comes out, people go crazy. They go, the new salt's the best thing ever. And then people switch salts. And then you get a lot of reports about dead stuff in their tanks because they switch salts. I don't know why people switch salts if everything's going good in their tank. I think if everything's going good, why do you want a new salt? Especially because people say this is better, this salt is better. I don't even know what better means. I don't know how to test better. I don't really know how to get a metric for better. It's an opinion, that's nice to have, but I don't want to be one of the 1 million monkeys testing a new salt. The salt is the basic foundation of the environment that your fish are in and that your corals are in. And when you go to change those, it only makes some kind of sense that there's going to be differences in it, and problems will probably happen. We know we like corals to have stability, so when you change your salt, you're doing anything but giving them stability. So, my recommendation for salt is you get the salt that you can always get. Because when you have an emergency and you need to do 100% water change, at least that's the same. Yeah, they're not a miracle, it's just a new salt. This is another thing that pops up from time to time with anhydrous salt, meaning there's no water in the constituents. And when you mix it up, it gets really hot. And people have claimed that that heat is good for the water. They've claimed that because there's no water in the constituents that make up the salt mix, that that's more pure, and therefore that's better. But I don't know what more pure means. I don't know it's more pure than what, and I don't know what better is. So I squint at these things a lot because I don't know what they are. Now again, if we could figure out a way to show that this salt is actually better than other salts, that anhydrous salts are better, that would be great. Unfortunately, I can list off 100 tanks that you guys all know, Sanjay, Joe, us at work, Mitch Carl's tanks that are now Tim's tanks at Henry Dorley Zoo. Thousands of tanks that are fabulous that don't use this salt, that are using the less pure salt, but they're fine. So I'm not really sure how we're making this comparison. And I also understand marketing, that's fine too. I just like the claims to match up with what they're saying. Here's a different story. So, I love this story. About 2 or 3 years ago, a blog came out that said that there was a disastrously high level of mercury in a frozen fish food. And the initial report didn't have any numbers. It said, I can't share these numbers, but it's really bad. So that should make you squint a whole lot when somebody says that. And it wasn't just like they didn't contact the manufacturer of the salt, of the food. They just, here we go, we're live on a blog and this is what we're saying, but we can't share the information with you. This is a good success story because people leapt into action and went crazy. Rhett Talbot contacted this guy and dug at him to get the information. But again, it wasn't to go, you're an idiot or whatever. It was to go, if this is true, we actually need to know this. And to know this, we need some real solid evidence of it. And so Rhett was able to see what the source of the information was, and it looked like it was, I think it was 20,000 times the amount of mercury that was allowed for human consumption, which is a lot. But the other foods that were tested at the same time did not show that. So I don't know if you've done much testing. Well, you have. You all have done testing because you have reef tanks. But when you get a crazy reading, do you jump into action? If your alkalinity has been 9 and then you get a reading that says it's 15, do you immediately start doing a water change? Or do you test again to see if that's true? Test again, right? Just for fun, the other way, if you get a good reading, do you ever test again? No, yeah, because that's clearly correct if it's good. So the question, let's test this again, right? So it was pretty clear that one of the foods was Larry's Reef Frenzy. So what Larry did is he took his food and he got 2 competitors' food who he figured was the other foods that this was talking about, and he sent them off for independent testing to a couple labs. And they came back all fine, all within decent realms of what mercury should be. Larry's a tiny bit elevated, but that makes more sense because he's got more fresh fish in it, right? And then Rhett wrote that up. And this was probably contained pretty well between a month. But this is the kind of thing that can ruin a company. But there was no evidence for it. It turned out that the actual evidence was an email that was sent to the blogger with explicit instructions not to share this information because it looks like it's a huge mistake because it doesn't make any sense for this result to come out. Right? But he did it anyway, so that's not cool. But it got shut down and contained, and we're all good. And it's great that Larry had the resources and the wherewithal and the drive to actually do it and get the stuff tested. But it's kind of unfair that somebody can make a claim. I could say, I'm looking at Mitch Carl. I'm going to say something horrible. I shouldn't say that. I could, if I say Ben stole stuff from me, I better have some evidence that Ben stole stuff from me. It's not up to Ben to then go, I didn't steal stuff and prove it. You can't do that anyway. It's a negative. So the takeaway from this that I think is good is called Hitchens' razor. It's after Christopher Hitchens. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So it feels to me like when we saw that first post about that there was elevated mercury, that we all should have said, if you're not going to give us evidence for this, you're completely ignorable. And I'd like to see if we can get more people doing stuff like that, because too many times people just say stuff and then it's taken as truth. Exploring it, discussing it, that's all good, but giving a company a bad name because of something with no evidence seems like a bad idea. Let's talk about nano bubbles, because nano bubbles are super fun. This is a methodology that was put forth a few years ago, and you basically put a wood air stone in front of an intake in your sump, and then it fills the tank with bubbles, and that's supposed to do all kinds of things for the tank. This was the first thing I saw about nano bubbles, or somebody sent it to me. And it made me a little crazy, because there's some crazy claims in there. Better water clarity, I don't know what that means. There's a couple that make sense. Let's go through them. CO2 degassing. I think what they really meant with that is being able to get more oxygen into the tank. So sure. You run bubbles through it. We know that. That's kind of what your skimmer does as well. You end up with better dissolved oxygen. Excess slime remover from corals and fish. I'm not aware of anything that shows that corals and fish have excess slime, so I'm not sure what that actually means. As this went on in discussions, these things morphed and changed, and they had some evidence for the slime, but that was evidence from low tides in Australia, and the paper they had actually said that the producing of the excess mucus came at a huge energy cost to the corals and was actually traumatized them more. So it's not a good thing, but people are doing it every week. I don't know. Better water clarity. Removal of detritus and floating particulates. Sure, that's good. I could see that happening. The small bubbles bond to stuff and floats it up. That's kind of what your skimmer does too. And your pH should rise. Totally got that, right? I'm good with that. Possible remediation of cyano and dinoflagellates, maybe. If those things can all clump up with those bubbles, they can float up, and then you take them out by skimming. Better coral and fish membrane health, which allows them to grow faster and more colorful. I don't know how you could possibly prove that or show that in any way or provide evidence for that. Fish membrane health, right? Better appetite, I don't know, right? Higher POB in invertebrate populations, I have no idea how that could be connected. So it's a lot of stuff like that. And I found a thread about it and went to talk to some of the people who were doing it. And I said, okay, sounds good. You guys have done this. You're saying that your pH got better after. What was your numbers before and what was your numbers after? And they didn't have those numbers. And I kept saying, well, I'm not sure how you can say that it made your pH better. If you said that theoretically it should make your pH better, I'm all on board with you. But that's not what you said. You said that it does. There's another one here about faster carapace hardening on inverts after shedding. And how did you test that? What did you see? How do you know it's harder? What was its softness previously? And there were no answers to that. But the weirdest thing was for the pH one, I got called an asshole for asking for that. I mean, I'm an asshole, but for asking for pH numbers before and after doesn't seem like a fair reason to call me an asshole. There's so many good reasons. And then they said, we're not scientists, we can't do peer-reviewed studies. And it was like, I don't want peer-reviewed studies, I just want to know what your pH was before and what your pH was after. You have reef tanks, you can have that. Then there was some more evidence, and we talked about stuff, and it was all exciting and dramatic. And then this was one of the pieces of evidence, right? Because it's all about evidence, right? If you can show me the evidence, I'm totally thrilled by it. I would love this method to do everything people say it does. So here's these growth pictures, right? I'll just tell you what I see. I see that we had 244 days of a newly fragged coral building up the energy reserves to be able to burst out and bloom. And then I see 67 days after 240 days where they were bubbling. The problem with this is pretty much the kind of growth sequence you would expect no matter what, right? We've all seen frags start to take off. We're all sitting in front of our tanks waiting for the time when the frags really start to bloom and when this corals start to grow fast. So I can't really say that this is compelling evidence. So I'm looking for compelling evidence. I'm not really compelled by this at all, and I'm not sure why you would be, especially in 67 days when it was already going. The other interesting thing is last year, or was it this year? I'm not sure. I got asked to be on this, what do they call this? A live cast, I guess they call it. And we were going to talk about stuff, and the bubble people were on it. I was shanghaied into it because I decided I don't want to talk anymore because it got personal and crazy, and they were mean, and it brought out the worst in me, and I don't like that. So on this, I calmed myself down as soon as I realized what was going on and tried to be very calm. And every time I said, well, how do you know that? They said, well, we're not the scientists. Why don't you prove it? Why don't you do the study? Why don't you test it for us? And I kept saying, it's not up to me to test your claim. You know? It's not up to Ben to defend himself from me saying he stole my stuff. I should be able to show video of him stealing my stuff. I have that video, by the way. And it was this is called, you know, the burden of proof. The one who makes the claim has the responsibility to support the claim. But I think we all get excited about claims we can test ourselves. And that's exciting, and it's like a mystery, and it's being Sherlock Holmes, and it's fun, and we can sink our teeth into it and say, does this really work? But if the claim doesn't have any support to really show that it works in the first place, it doesn't make sense for us to spend our time showing that it doesn't work. It's up to them to show that it does work. And I think that's a really important concept. I'm very confused often when people see it the other way around. Why don't you test that for me, Rich? Because I got stuff to do. I got my own stuff. I got to like talk to my daughter. What's her name? I don't even know anymore. So this is one of the important ones. And a while ago too, about actually in the 2000s, there was this product, the EcoAqua Lizer. Anybody remember that thing? Yeah. All right. Just to cut to the chase a little bit, the EcoAqua Lizer has been given an F rating by the Better Business Bureau, specifically for not providing evidence to back up their claims. But this was an easy one to test. And the danger about us testing people's claims for them is that it becomes what's expected. So this was a great early one, and it was very easy to test. They set it up on two 10-gallon tanks, and just checked ORP. No difference between the two tanks. And then they decided, this was by Inland Reef, they decided to cut one open to see what was inside, and it was these little magnets. And apparently running water through a tube with magnets on the outside was somehow, the claims were amazing. It worked for you? Fantastic. You still running it? How did the biopellets try work out? So, magnets, if you think that's going to work, why wouldn't the magnets in your maxi jets be working as well? If it's supposed to align the water and allow for better clarity, and there's a far infrared emitting ceramic, and but it just doesn't make sense at the first level, and they never showed that it did anything. It was just a bunch of claims. They had a bunch of science-looking stuff that supported the claims. A bunch of papers by Japanese PhDs who could not be found anymore that said that magnets did incredible things to water, but that had never been replicated. So that doesn't help. So again, it's the same kind of thing. Does it make sense at the bottom of it? Is it just anecdote? Do the claims make any sense for us to look at? And when it actually gets tested by somebody else, does it actually seem to work? It doesn't. Although there are still people who swear by this product, even though it's no longer around. I think somebody told me that they could see in their skimmer that bubble size would change when they ran the EcoAqua Lizer. And I don't know how you could possibly do that. And it's got a lot of the same kind of supports as the Nano Bubbles. So there's a bunch, oh, by the way, they don't call them Nano Bubbles anymore. They're micro bubbles or nano micro bubbles, because in one of these long discussions, Randy Holmes Farley was involved in it. We kept saying you can't actually produce nano bubbles with what you're doing. All nano bubbles are produced by forcing water under high pressure through a ceramic diffuser, and you're not doing that. And then they said, well, they're not nano bubbles. And it's like, well, now you've just changed everything, and we don't know what you're talking about anymore. They also said if you point a laser pointer down through your tank, you could see it reflect off the nano bubbles. But it reflects off anything. Anything floating in the water. Anyway, so the point of this one is, another take-home is, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If somebody says something that's really outside of how we think reefs are supposed to work or how we think reefs work, it's fine to entertain that idea, but the idea that it's true or that there's evidence for it needs to be pretty rock solid. It needs to be really extraordinary. Like a cancer treatment, right? Man, you better have some real evidence that it works better, not using chemo is better than chemo. It's got to be good. It's got to be good. And like I say, I want them all to work, and because I get no joy from things not working. But I went through my feed this morning and pulled a bunch of products, some products, so I thought we'd just go over them real quick and see. And again, I want these to work. So bacteria in a bottle. I guess this is Dr. Tim. Tim's a smart guy. Tim's a good guy. I like him very much. The bacteria clearly does something. The question I have is, does it do the things we can claim for marketing in our tanks? I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not going to test it because I don't want to set up 15 tanks and shepherd them through just so I can be up at a MACNA once and say, no, it didn't work. It doesn't seem like a good investment to me. We know it does something. We use some of this at the Steinhart to seed tanks. What we do find, though, is that, I don't think we use this product, we use a different one, is that when we add livestock to the tank, mostly in quarantine, then we have to cycle all over again. So It does something, but does it do what people think it does or what people say it does? I don't know. This one's an interesting one. This is a ceramic filter media. These come and go every 6 to 10 years. They come back into vogue for a little while. So this is not new, having ceramic, fluff ceramic in your sump. But some of the claims are interesting. They made a completely, it's not on this one, but there was like, it replaces this amount of live rock. And so I wrote to them and I said, great, what do you have that shows that? And they said, we don't know, that's what the manufacturer said. We'll ask the manufacturer for you, and I didn't hear anything back, which is, that's fine, they got other stuff to do. So I don't know about this stuff. But when they make a specific claim, I feel like it's okay to ask about it. The same thing with this thing. This is a Salinity Pen, and I bought one because I hate I hate all testing because it's a pain and it's never accurate enough for me, but consistently accurate. So I got one of these, and I actually found that I was getting better results by testing in a cup of, better results, I should quantify that, better as in it matched my refractometer and my conductivity probe more closely if I tested it in a cup of water and not in that little cup that they have there that goes on the end of the pen, right? I'm going to walk over here. This little thing slides on, and that's where your water sample goes, and then you press the button, and it temperature compensates, and it shows it to you in different kind of scales. So I said, I'm getting a better response in a cup, and they said, well, you can't do it in your tank because there's electromagnetic interference in the tank. I said, yeah, no, it's in a cup. It's not in the tank. It's isolated. And they said, I think the first response was, I answered that question already. I think they're tired of me asking questions, which is fine. And I asked again. I got the same, we'll talk to the manufacturer. So, and I know a bunch of people who've got some of these, and it's the same kind of thing. We can't get consistent results out of it. So as much as I'd love to use that all the time, it's kind of fallen out of favor, and I'm back to the refractometer because I can calibrate that every time I use it and know. This one's really interesting. This is coming up in the last couple of weeks. This is an in-tank acro-eating flatworm treatment. And on one of the forums, there's a huge thread about it, and it seems like they're going about it the right way, which is pretty fantastic. It seems like they did a bunch of their own in-house testing, and then they moved to beta testing and real-world testing with a bunch of people with reef tanks. And it seems like the response is really good, and that it seems to work. I haven't seen any of the actual data yet or any of the actual information. So while I'm skeptical, I'm really hopeful, like I always am with everything that I'm skeptical about. I want it to work. Because if we had a reef-safe acro-eating flatworm treatment, how great would that be? So that's supposed to come out in the next couple weeks and be available, and so hopefully, right? Hope springs eternal, right? Which is why it's essentially worthless. So this is a baloney detection kit. Carl Sagan put one of these together in the demon-haunted world for just general baloney, but I'm going to go over it because I want us to have tools to be able to go out into the world to be able to navigate making decisions about our tank. So the first one is, how reliable is the source of the claim, right? Is it Sanjay about light? If Sanjay says something about light, I tend to believe it because Sanjay's shown a good track record with things about light. Everything else, not so much. But light, he really seems to know. And so for me, that's pretty reliable. I started using Benny Reef because a guy, Dwayne Ostrich, up in Seattle, who I trust, said this is really good. So I'm, okay, if Dwayne says it, I'll try it. Or is the claim for some random person, fragme173 at yahoo.com on some forum? I don't know why we would trust that person. I mean, I know why we would trust that person, because we're looking for easy answers. We often go look for answers that mirror what we already think, right? So watch out for that. Just because somebody's saying what you want them to doesn't mean that it's accurate. So if the claim is, you have to judge that. Have the claims been verified? right? That's a harder one for us because I guess we need the million monkeys for that. What do a whole lot of people, have a whole lot of people done that? And does it work for them or not? Is it too good to be true, right? When LEDs first came out, there was a product with a little LED. It was for decoration. I forget who makes it, and I can't find a picture of it. And it had an air stone in it. And it was, you know, it was all cool looking. It was small and went in your tank. And one of the claims on the packaging was that it kills ick. That's insane. But man, if it worked, it would be great. It doesn't work. I think you need a lot of light to do that. Does the claim have an overcomplicated explanation? So when you get into some of the nano micro scrubbing bubbles, I don't want things scrubbing my coral. That's a weird thing to say. They get very complicated, and that and you have to become an expert in that field of science to be able to follow down the rabbit hole and know if that claim is true or not. So squint at that kind of stuff. If it's too complicated, it might not be real. Are the claims covered in green speak? That's another one. Anything that says, you know, good for the environment makes me squint a bunch because I'm not sure how you prove that. There's a lot of debate about the sunscreen, you know, in coral reefs now. You know, is it true? You know, well, yeah. If you, it's just like rats with saccharin, right? If you feed a rat 500 times its own body weight of saccharin, it's going to get cancer. But if you feed it 500 times its own body weight of anything, it's probably going to get cancer. So if you put the corals in a small thing and you put the sunscreen in them, they're probably going to die. If it's diffuse, maybe not, right? So I think Hawaii just passed a thing about reef-safe sunscreen. And I think Florida wants to too. Well, let's talk about Florida more because that's easier. There's way big problems in the water around Florida already. So focusing on a sunscreen seems like a small one to me. And being able to pick out that the corals around Florida are being impacted by people's sunscreen as opposed to raw sewage or the effluent from the sugarcane manufacturing, or just people doing stuff, that's a hard one to pull out. So green speak should make you squint a little bit. And too many claims. This one seems to have gone away, which is wonderful, but we used to have like the reef DNA and the reef vital. The claims on those were it would make your water clear, it would feed your fish, it would add bacteria, it would clean your glass, it would result in less algae, it would give you the right algae, it would grow your coralline, it was just this less disease, this huge laundry list. And you know, some of the reef medications, the ick medications say they work in fresh and salt water. That seems like a weird one to me because they're different parasites. So if there's too many claims, you should also be a little bit squinty. And then what do people you know think of the claim? Because that's pretty much ultimately all we've got. Who can you talk to when you read a claim that you go, I wonder if this is worthwhile? And it's got to be better than just posting it and getting random information on the forums. You need to have somebody you know or people that you know that you can have a reasonable discussion about it and decide what you think about it before you decide if you want to risk your tank by trying it. So the four things that I think are the bigger takeaways are correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because you did something doesn't mean the result you now see is caused by that thing. Your tank is a dynamic system. You're doing lots of things to it all the time, especially when you're having problems. So to be able to try to pin it on one thing. I mean, I had a problem in my tank in the last 3 months. I threw everything I could at it, right? I used all kinds of bacteria. I used probiotics. I used this. Someone's going to stab me because I usually say don't use that stuff. There was a couple other things I did, you know, different resins, it was, you know. And why did I do it? Because I wanted not to feel impotent as protozoans raged through my tank. I wanted to feel like hopefully I'm trying to do something to get ahead of whatever the problem was, which we still don't know what it is. So I get that. But I'm not going to say that it did work. I'm going to say I tried all these things. I have no idea if anything worked or if it was just time. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. I think that's a good one, and I'm trying to get more in the habit of that. When somebody says something without evidence, I just go the other way. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim, not on you who is asking questions about the claim they made. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If somebody says that they have a miracle product, they should have miracle evidence that the product does what they say it does. And that's all I've got for now. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for MACNA for having me. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.